Okay, so thank you very much. It's an honor to have here with us Geoff Morgan. You have already been with us last year and the year before. Geoff is, I think, one of the most brilliant thinkers that we have now in Portugal. I know him for a long time. But before going to the session of today, to say that tomorrow we are going to have also a very interesting session with someone also from the UK, Martin Wolf. Martin Wolf is the chief commentator of the Financial Times. Usually, he is also with us every year, and tomorrow he will speak with us about a topic that I think it's very interesting: a world of purpose and trust. Because the world we are living is not easy, and then we have to do that. Okay, but going to our session today, Geoff, as I told you, is someone that has doing a very. We can pass to the other slide. So Geoff, as I told you, is someone that has been doing a very, very interesting work on this topic. He was in the past advisor for Tony Blair. He was the CEO of Nesta, that is a very important agency in the UK for a long time. Now he's teaching in UCL, where, for instance, Mariana Mazzucato is also teaching, and he's doing a lot of work with several countries, several institutions. So he has a very global agenda. He has a very well-known book that is the reason for us to be today, Social Innovation, How Societies Find the Power of Change. It's a fantastic book where he defines the topics and the trends of social innovation. And I think it's always very important to summarize that we had 15 years ago someone that is not already with us, that was Diogo Vasconcelos, that was, in fact, someone that in Portugal was the responsible for this agenda. Diogo was someone that worked also, I think, with Geoff. They, some years ago, decided to launch a project that was very interesting for this topic, and I think it's also there. So I will pass the agenda for Geoff. Then Filippo will make a very, very short comment on Geoff. And then we have, of course, the discussion with everyone. Geoff, thank you very much for being with us. It's always an honor to have us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And yes, I worked very closely with Diogo for quite a few years, now quite a long time ago. And for those of you who don't know me, so I've had a career partly as a bureaucrat. So I worked in running teams in the British government, but also quite a lot in Australia, sometimes as a running foundations, Nesta and the Young Foundation, sometimes as a more of a social entrepreneur, and now as an academic. But as you say, Jamie, I spend a lot of my time working around the world, I guess, on problem solving. So I've just spent the last 2 hours with our finance ministry. So my brain is a little bit frazzled talking about finance methods. I'm working with the Inter-American Development Bank on demographic change and all the challenges of Latin America and Caribbean on fertility, and on AI. Like probably many of you, I spend a lot of my time. I teach a course on AI, and I was trying to help our government on AI procurement is where I've spent my afternoon. And I'm now actually a professor in engineering department, but it's an interesting place. And tomorrow I teach students on engineering for social change. We try and fuse engineering knowledge of energy, water, communications with a social perspective. So what I'll do is share there's sort of thoughts in progress, as it were. So I'm hoping I will learn from you through your responses. So in a way, the question is, what is happening to social innovation in the quite weird times we're in? I think your country is a lot saner than much of the world, but the UK feels a little bit insane. The US feels completely insane. And so, yeah, what do we do? And is it, I don't know if any of you saw this film. I saw it last weekend, One Battle After Another. Is that our mental model? We're not winning any wars. It's just a constant struggle. And this is a film about mainly things getting worse. It's a very dark picture of America run by fascists, essentially, in the near future. So what I'll talk a little bit about, where are we now? How does social innovation relate to politics? And then I want to float some things I've been working on recently in relation to the role of universities and research. And I'll try and go reasonably quickly. And the second two are very much the open questions. And some of you will know the works of Antonio Gramsci, much quoted Italian communist of 100 years ago. He's often quoted for this saying in his prison notebooks: the crisis consists in the fact the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this time, morbid symptoms appear. And I think many people feel that may describe the world we're in now, where there's old structures and systems slowly dying, but the new cannot yet be born. But he also said, if you beat your head against the wall, it's your head which breaks and not the wall. And I know many people feel in this environment they are beating their heads against the wall. So there's how we get the personal side of this. I would be interested in all your views. So where are we now? So I've been sort of involved in this field for quite a while. 20 years ago, I published a thing called Social Silicon Valleys. We were trying to argue you needed an equivalent to venture capital and experimentation and radicalism in the social world, as Silicon Valley had. We did an open book of social innovation that decade. Then the book you mentioned. And more recently, I've done a book on imagination, which comes out in paperback next week here in the UK, called Another World is Possible, which is really trying to encourage bolder social and political imagination. And I'll say a little bit about that later. All of you know the field we're talking about. It is a very complex, dynamic field, everything from schools to food to software. And in my optimistic moments, if I look at what's been achieved in the last 20 years, and Portugal is very much a trailblazer, we have transformed the situation in some respects in relation to money, with investment funds, grant programs, bonds. We had 2 weeks ago the Finnish innovation agency, Citra, visiting, who are making social innovation really all of their work, and Nesta. Very little of that was happening 20 years ago. We have, quite a lot of mobilization of power. You have national policies, so do some other countries, like Malaysia has a very impressive one now. Lots of city programs, literally thousands of innovation labs around the place, which was not true 20, 25 years ago. Lots in universities with research centers and courses and so on. And also lots happening grassroots, not just traditional social innovation, but also new ones like the maker movements or around software, or now around AI, a whole kind of civic tech movement. So part of me thinks, wow, this is pretty good. This didn't exist. We've begun to thicken out the world of social innovation. And a lot of things are happening which wouldn't be happening otherwise. The darkness comes if you then look at the wider climate. So this is one of the many, many measures of what's happening in the global mind. This is looking at all books in the last 450, 500 years, with this shift away from progress towards a focus on anxiety, caution, worry, dystopia. Most countries have pessimism about their children's future. I'm not sure what your numbers are. Can't see them there. But certainly in most of Europe, more people are pessimistic about the future than optimistic. We have our culture focused on environmental disasters or soulless tech futures without much place for humans. And there's this amazing research showing, if you look at what's online, this in the last 20 years, a sort of craziness in the ways in which people are talking and communicating, partly an effect of social media algorithms. but this catastrophizing, overgeneralizing, hyper emotional, angry mood is in some ways makes it quite hard to do sensible, positive social change. So that's what gets me more negative. And Philippe was in this discussion last week where we were talking a bit about the paralytic pessimism which comes if you see everything everywhere, just a perma crisis, a poly crisis, ecological, economic, political, and so on. And many, very good people, I think, are almost paralyzed by their sense our civilization is going crazy. And yet, on another way, if you look at, for example, global assessments of well-being and thriving, this year is the best ever in human history at a global level in terms of people's quality of life. Is not true in Britain or the US and some parts of Europe, which has gone backwards. But if you take a global perspective, bizarrely, this is probably the best year ever in human history. So there's a mismatch between some of the facts and some of the perspectives, particularly in the North, particularly in Europe and North America. So in the book on imagination, I try and look at, what can we learn from the past of how people did imagine new futures, ideas of human rights or citizens' assemblies. The other thing I did this afternoon was I was part of the advisory group for the Global Citizens' Assembly, which will be part of COP30. Now that's an amazing thing in a way. It's an attempt to create a new kind of global democracy, quite small scale in its sense, but it's an idea which has grown, just as ideas like circular economies and co-production in health have spread. I look at the role of utopias. I won't go into that. I still think we suffer from having so many more dystopias than utopias. We're about to build probably 10 or 12 new towns in the UK. And these are great opportunities to rethink what should a town look like? How do you reimagine your libraries, your parks, your primary schools? And in history, often this reimagining through place has been a very powerful motor for social change. And some nations at some points have been pioneers. My family migrated from New Zealand to Britain, so I see New Zealand as a good example of using distance, the first country to give women the vote, one of the first welfare states, well-being budgets, legal status for nature, and many other things. And I won't go through this. There's lots of other sources like the arts or business imagination or some of the extraordinary public innovations, which so now in the UK, we are trying to learn from, India's digital public infrastructure, or we had the Ukrainian digital minister here last week, who's turned Ukraine. They are now fifth in the world in digital government, from having been number 105, I think, 5 years ago. So yeah, there's lots of, inspiring examples of how people radically reimagine things. And I've been trying to make sense of some of the dynamics of this and how, in a way, imagination starts off at the top of this with a sort of ethos, a vision, maybe a quite simple idea like a circular economy, then generates ideas which can then be applied in different sectors, and then you get real examples, experiments, and practice. And for me, this is part of how social innovation works in thickening out these ideas. This happened to the welfare state 100 years ago. And an interesting example is the global welfare state, which Gunnar Myrdal proposed 60 years ago, but we still does not exist at all, has not been thickened out. And so these are some of the examples. And in my work, I look at all these different methods you can use. And there's a very nice little book out last year, which I'd recommend on design methods and their overlap with other bodies of method in systems thinking, entrepreneurial thinking, computational. So you can see there, engineering. And this guy shows they're all actually talking about the same things, but they don't learn from each other. There's very little cross-pollination. But they're all trying to grapple with how do you understand complexity and how to be creative and impactful in complex, interconnected systems. So this is a book I wish I had written, but it's I didn't, but I did read it, so I recommend it. So if that's a bit of the where we are, I just want to focus then on two problem issues. So one is, in a sense, what should the relationship of social innovation be to politics? And that's partly about, and you've achieved this very well, and Diogo was a master of getting people like Jose Manuel Barroso to, have a program in the European Commission to turn the social innovation ideas into a programmatic form, which politicians can back. That's one part of this. And in some countries like the UK, I think we've gone backwards more than we've gone forwards, if I'm honest on that. But then we have this deeper problem of a steady move away from democracy by age, which is summarized in that picture. Martin Wolf, I'm sure, will talk about this tomorrow. And we have large groups of the under 30s, pretty pro-authoritarianism, pretty instinctively anti-democracy. So, and then in some other parts of the world, we have authoritarian governments really crushing social innovation, as in China, where it's much weaker than 10 years ago, or Turkey, or even India. So this question of what do we do? Partly, how do we use innovation methods to rethink democracy, as Audrey Tang has done in Taiwan, or some of the citizens' assemblies are doing, or Iceland, the bottom right. How do we show there's a very different way of doing democracy, which I think is essential for democracy to survive? But in some contexts, like Hong Kong, which is the top right-hand picture, or Turkey, you have to go into opposition. If you are a social innovator, you are against the state. You are, fighting. You are likely to be imprisoned. You are likely to be locked up. The Russians, the Belarusians, they're all in this place too. And I think that sort of chilling environment for democratic politics is part of what we have to talk about. And probably the situations are very different in different parts of the world. But that is, in a sense, social innovation cannot ignore politics, as perhaps at some periods it tried to do, but it's very hard in the 2020s. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about is partly prompted by Karl Marx's gravestone in London, where he said the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. And what I'm about to say partly comes from now being in a university and really asking, what's the role of social science in social innovation? What is the role of social science in giving our societies good options for the future? There are great traditions of social scientists who absolutely straddled analysis of the present with creative ideas engaged in the world. There's Amartya Sen on the bottom left there, Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize, Keynes, Rona Rappaport, Jeremy Bentham, who's the weird guy in the middle, who's the founder of my university, whose stuffed body is in the entryway to UCL. But he constantly generated ideas, very creative ideas. He's often thought of in relation to Foucault and the panopticon, but actually many of his ideas were very progressive and very liberal. So there's a tradition of social scientists being absolutely engaged with social innovation. But I think that has weakened. And I propose this framework, which I've been trying to talk to social science bodies about, to imagine a 2x2 space for how research is done. Research which is either a diagnosis of what's the problems, what's going on in our society, or which is trying to generate answers, prescriptions. And that can either be incremental or it can be radical. And I can't speak for Portugal, but certainly in the US and the UK, if you fill this out, you get quadrant one, which is analysis of the present. In the past, it could be of poverty or economics or family, within economics, sociology, psychology, and so on. which is essentially incremental diagnosis. There's then quadrant three, more incremental prescription, often doing policy options for a city or a government, but usually very near term. They're usually, things which could be implemented in 1 to 3, 5 years. And then on the right-hand side, you have the radical diagnosis, which you get a lot of in the Marxist tradition in universities. It's critique, it's commentary, but it doesn't actually tell you what to do. And then quadrant four, I would call the social science of medium to long-term options. How might we run our democracy or welfare or the family, in a generation's time, in 2040 or 2050 or 2060. And at the moment, if you do the analysis of it, and I've tried doing this, looking in academic journals, and you search for the balance of these, you find huge amounts of analysis and almost nothing in quadrant four, almost literally nothing. It's astonishing. I mean, there is the drying up of social science, which is working a generation or two out on options, is extraordinary. Now, there's a lot to be said of why that's happened. Some quite good reasons about data and empirical social science and so on, but it's a problem. There are many reasons for this. The role of the disciplines, the role of peer review, the role of incentives, and so on. I won't go through these. And the sort of things which I would imagine in quadrant four are the sort of projects which might be looking at, democracy in 2050, let's say. There's lots of innovations. There's just a list of a few of them, from participatory budgeting, which you have in Lisbon, through to all the many uses of AI in deliberation, to new laws, new educational curriculum. But what's missing is the systematic work to pull these all together into a plausible pathway, a roadmap towards a reimagined democracy in the next 20 or 30 years. A very different example would be how we use all the time which has been liberated. So our working hours are roughly less than half what they were 200 years ago. Life expectancy roughly double. So we have an enormous liberation of time. We're both older. The average age of many countries older than ever before. Years left to live greater than ever before. So again, a whole host of ways you could be using that time. I'm doing a thing next month for the Danish EU presidency on lifelong learning, for example. But I'm not aware of anyone pulling these together, again, in terms of systematic pathways, possible roadmap for the next few decades to help guide action in the present. And a final example of that is a lot of my work at the moment is on institutional design. So exactly a year ago, the Nobel Prize for Economics went to Daron Acemoglu and his colleagues for their work on institutions as the key explainer of long-run growth, but also societal success. Fantastic work. But they've done almost nothing on the obvious implication of that, which is that how we design institutions now may be as important for the future. So they reflect a social science world which is very good at the present and the past, and not much good at all on the future. And the team I'm now part of with the Institutional Architecture Lab, we're trying to fill this space, working with many governments, many foundations on really the institutional design options of the era of stacks, meshes, protocols, platforms, myceliums, a completely different language of organizational design. But we couldn't find was any work being done in universities on this. And most people in governments are still quite unaware of any of these options, even though business has been completely revolutionized in the last generation with very new organizational models in a TikTok or a Google or OpenAI or arm. So that's partly what I was talking to mayors about, is if you're designing a city administration in 2025, it should look very different from one in the year 2000 or 1975. But the universities aren't really providing much help on that. So a very final point, um, and this is in the UK context. About 3 years ago, the government set up a new organization called the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, ARIA, with a very large budget of about £1 billion. And they are partly modeled on DARPA and Sprendi in Germany, backing teams to do breakthrough research in science and technology on really radical ideas, things like programmable plants or new brain computer interfaces. And I think they're great. It's good that they're doing that. But in a way, they show up how bizarre it is that we spend £1 billion on this and nothing on its equivalent for the social. Nothing on redesigning care, welfare, democracy, neighborhood, primary schools, you name it. Nothing in Britain. And in a way, this is a symptom of something that's gone wrong in our social organization of brainpower. I think that we're not doing the right kind of social exploration, and then this lack of options, of good options, feeds a fatalism and a pessimism, which become self-fulfilling. And for me, in a way, it is a bit like architecture. You want your architects to do maquettes, models of the buildings they might build. They've got to be reasonably detailed so you can interrogate them before you build them. And I think we need the equivalence in social innovation, which means people, which means money, which means methods, structures, and so on, and demand for it. And if we don't, then we risk this sort of strange period where I think so often technology is accelerating so fast now. So much money going into AI from Amazon, Alphabet, OpenAI, mind-boggling amounts, and sometimes feels like our politics and society are going accelerating backwards. So I will try and get rid of my screen share, and I hope that at least is provoking somebody to tell me
Yes, of
why I'm
course.
wrong.
Dear Geoff, very, very clear. As you know, we have a new Nobel Prize for Economics today. It's Philippe Aghion. He is also doing a lot of work on innovation. And Darren Acemoglu was with us last year in a very interesting session about institutions, for instance.
Yeah.
So I will pass to Philippa. She will make a very, very brief comment, and then we'll pass to Philippe and other people. I think we'll have a very good discussion. Philippa, please. A very brief comment. Okay.
Thanks for your presentation. It was very a lot of food for thoughts now. Giving my experience, I believe it's the starting point for it all. So I have a for-profit business and a non-profit, and I really tried to push social innovation in the Portuguese context. And here are my findings. So as you were mentioning, for a while I became super pessimistic, because social innovation, as per the ecosystem is built, is very much dependent on philanthropy or social responsibility of companies and a lot of bureaucracy. So I used to work in startups, tech scale-ups, and I want to see things happen still in my lifetime, and I'm a mother. So I decided to close my nonprofit. And so I wanted to share what my findings were. And it's interesting because you talked about them, at least you pinpoint some of them. And one of them is I'm now working, and I work with companies for a long time now. So I work with big companies in introducing social innovation into their own business model. And because we know that the sustainability in companies has three layers. You have philanthropy, you have ESG, and then you have what Michael Porter calls the share value businesses. So if in a way governments would push for more shared value businesses, then we would have social innovation embedded in companies. And we know that companies have the power to push things faster. And so what I'm doing now is focusing on the ones that can leverage this faster. And going back to, you use the word reimagining, and I love this word. And this what gave me my optimism back. First, to work with companies and understand that many of them, I work with healthcare, I work with energy, so really pillars of society. And the second thing is, how can we reimagining this in a way that it's not complex, because the world is already so complex. It's a VUCA world, right? Volatile, uncertain, ambiguous. And so I love your slide about the mycelium. So it's bioinnovation. And so nature is around, it's an R&D lab that's been around for 3.8 billion years. And we've been disregarding how much the principles of nature are teaching us about cooperating, about efficiencies, about simplifying things. And it's almost like human beings are doing the complete opposite, right? And this is probably why we're in such a big mess these days. And so the principles now that I use with companies to innovate, it's precisely biomimicry and bioinnovation. So I'm all, when you show up the mycelium, I said, yeah, that's it. My conclusions are that social innovation as it was, depending on almost charity, it's not working. It's a lot of push. It's a lot of effort. And the path of least resistance, in my view, it is regulating companies so that they become shared value businesses, such as Nespresso, for instance, and then they will push in reimagining this as nature does. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your thoughts, Philippe. Very, very good. Philippe, do you want to make any comment or any question to Geoff? Philippe Almeida, I don't know if you are listening to us.
Yes,
we can't hear.
Okay.
Now you can hear me?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, perfect. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you very much. Thank you again, Geoff. Thank you very much for inviting me, Jaime, to be here.
Yes, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
It's always very interesting. And you asked me, please, can you make a comment on Geoff's intervention? And when Geoff Mulgan speaks and shares his thoughts, my only comment is listen carefully. And there's nothing else. We should listen and hear, because it's quite an inspiration. And for some time, let me just share my one perspective on top of what Geoff said. Just to give some context to the colleagues that are here listening, I've been leading for the last 9 years the Portuguese National Public Policy for Social Innovation, which is called Portugal Social Innovation. It's a pioneering program that was created in 2014. We've been mobilizing European structural funds to develop the social innovation ecosystem in Portugal. And it has been quite successful. We've supported more than 1,000 social innovation projects. We've designed 9 different financing instruments so far. And we are doing that alongside with more than 1,000 social investors from all sectors. So looking from the numbers perspective, it's quite impressive what happened in Portugal. And what makes it special, and then I'll go to my comment, is that this was a top-down approach. It was the government that created this national public policy program to develop an ecosystem, to promote social innovation and social investment. And this is quite the opposite of what's happening around the world. This was the government and the public sector trying to develop social innovation through cross-sector partnerships. And that's my perspective. That's what I wanted to share with you. My perspective is that I fully agree with everything that Geoff said and his perspective on pessimism and the solutions that we need, even from research. I'm a researcher myself. I've been for 20 years an academic, and I know that social sciences, and I studied Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mills and everything after them. Social sciences became more positivist than normative, and we should have new ideas on how the world should be organized. But I think that we cannot move the needle without bringing into the equation public policies. The private sector, of course, can be creative, agile, and create new networks, new perspectives. But it's the public sector that, from my perspective, can be a change maker. And because of that, is the weakest link, because it's far behind of what's happening. And even in Portugal is like that. Even though I was talking about our positive experience, the thing is, after 10 years, we couldn't still yet create effective mechanisms to transfer innovation that is being tested on the ground with communities, with entrepreneurs, to social policies, to public policies that can really scale and create a changing effect in society. So even having this national public policy program at the center of the core of different Portuguese governments, we weren't able so far to change this. And I give you just one number. For example, if you pick up the German public budget, the German overall budget for education for a whole year, and you divide it through the whole year from 1 January to 31 December, you pick the whole public budget for education. And you pick the whole philanthropic private budget for education as well in Germany. If you compare both, the private philanthropic budget for education in Germany would be sold out in the first 45 minutes of the year. Imagine, the comparison is amazing. So if you pick all the philanthropic and private money, that is not enough to make a real change if you want. And if public policies are not into innovation, and if they are not open, if we don't create new ways of opening public policies for transformation, we will not be able to change it. I think that what's been happening, what I've been seeing, not just from the Portuguese perspective, is that the pace of change, of challenges, have been quicker than the effects of innovation, so that governments can be open to create these new approaches that are not that vulnerable to the changing in political cycles. So if you have an urgency, if everything needs changes all of a sudden, you go to try to save everyone, and you lose the sight from the innovation. Because as Geoff was saying, if you don't have an empowered and strong society, what are you fighting for? And you are more on the side of fighting than on the side of changing. So, that's my...
Okay, thank you very much, Philippe. Geoff, we can have another comment or question, and then I pass to you. We have here several people, but I will pass to Fernanda Freitas, that has been, as I told you, doing a very interesting work on the field with a project that is a very real case of social innovation. Do you want to make a brief comment or a question, Fernanda, please?
Yes, thank you, James. Thank you, Geoff, for being here at this time of your time. And special thanks to Philippe Almeida, because he represents here the Portugal Social Innovation System that in fact helps, sponsor the project that I have right now. That I'm the president of an NGO that has a social innovation approach to children in hospitals. And our government tried to repeat it, not supporting us, but repeating it, and it failed. Which is interesting. That leads me to my question, because I really loved your explanation, and I think it feels my question has to do with something that Philippe just said regarding the public policies. So globally, now let's look at the whole set in a global political context where many governments are increasingly hostile toward our civil society. What do you consider to be an effective strategy to ensure that our social innovation not only survives, but also becomes like a transformative force integrated into public policies? That's my main question, and thank you so much for being here again.
Okay. So, Geoff, we pass you now, and then we have a second round, okay? If you agree.
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to Fernanda's question. I don't really. And it feels different in Russia or China, really hard at the moment. Whereas Turkey, there's actually a lot of strength in civil society, and they're building up from philanthropy, from some cities and so on. So yeah, it's a great question, but I don't have a sufficient answer. I mean, for Philippe, I admire so much of what you've done precisely because you have created an ecosystem and you've mobilized public policy, which I think is exactly what is needed. But there's not many places in the world which have gone anything like as far as you. In most places, it's much more fragmentary, it's weak, is not fully aligned with the state. And yet, everywhere, as you say, the state has vastly more resources than philanthropy. And then just two comments on Felipe's words. So first of all, on biology, I went very quickly over that. But in our work on the Institutional Architecture Lab, we've really majored on this and found that when we do sessions with politicians and governments, and we say to them, you don't have to think of a pyramid organogram, I should say, like Michael Porter would have proposed, but I won't be rude about him. You know, you can think of swarms and corals and octopuses and mycelium, and it takes about 20 minutes, but then they're completely liberated to think in very new ways, which are the sort of biomimicry of institutional design. And for me, this is a really exciting field to pursue. It's still pretty strange for most people, but I think this is the century when we'll increasingly see biological ways of thinking in conflict with mechanical ways of thinking, but we need the more biological ones for our complexity. And that then relates to one other thing I wanted to say, which connects to several of your comments. So the lecture I have to give tomorrow morning as part of a course on engineering for social change, tomorrow's one is on waste. We look at plastics, we look at paper, we look at glass, and for some things there's been great progress, like paper recycling in Europe is 80%, let's say. But if you look at e-waste, it's hardly got better at all. Most of the objects we're all looking at now will be thrown into landfill. We have chronic failure of dealing with e-waste. And the same with clothing. It's still probably 1%, 2% recycled. And the reason is business models. And this is why getting into the detail of business models is so crucial for so many areas of social change. And yet, of course, the businesses say, we would love to change our business models, but we need regulation and law to make it easier for us to do so. So this is why I think the sort of three-dimensional thinking, which has citizens, civil society, business, and the state working together to reshape systems is so important. Because otherwise, if one of them doesn't play their part, we get these blockages where, even as recycling clothing shouldn't be that difficult, but we are basically completely failing as a world on this one. It shouldn't be so difficult to redesign our cell phones, our laptops, so they're much easier to pull apart and recycle, but we're basically failing on that too. So yeah, I'm all with you on getting into the detail of business models, I guess.
Okay, then we have here other people. Nuno Comando is managing very interesting experience on this social innovation, Casa de Impacto. Nuno, do you want to make any question to Geoff?
Thank you, James. Actually, I don't have any further questions. I was listening to Philippe, and I was thinking to myself, yeah, we just need to hear attention with close attention what Geoff was saying, because this is actually very inspiring. And thank you very much for your time, Geoff. And I do not have any further questions. Just to say thank you for the time, and yeah, it was super interesting to hear you. So yeah.
Okay, I think we have here with us also Bernardo Souza, that has some experience on matters that collect with social science. Bernard, do you want to make any comment or question?
I may pop in. Thank you. Thank you, Geoff, for your great introduction and for everyone. Perhaps I will try to pose a question which I believe would be the interaction of what Philippe said and what you were saying, I believe. And Fernanda just gave an example of the state trying to actually improve what he's doing with social innovation, but not being able to do it. What I usually, from my experience, understand that many times happens is the failure of politicians and democracy to integrate social innovation in the way we interact with one another and the way we discuss in dialogue about new solutions. So my question to you is, what do you find? And I already understood that you are working with the government, but what would you say for other countries and for people who work either in the public sector or in philanthropy or even in the business sector? What should be our attitude? What could we do in order to improve democracy with social innovation? So how could we target politicians? How could we target political parties? How could we target even media to make these examples, these good examples, as Philippe was saying? We have a lot of them, but then we fail of introducing them inside the regulations or inside the public services. I don't know if I made myself understand.
Okay. And then to finalize this round, I think Luís Madeira Pires, that used to work in Gulbenkian, that you know very well, you have been there for several times. Luís, do you want to make any question or comment? I know that you like very much these topics, and you read the book of Geoff, so you have this experience on this. We are not listening, Luís. You must put the sound. Sorry. Sometimes Geoff.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Geoff, for your very interesting presentation. I have just one question. I was a bit, I wouldn't say shocked, but impressed by the fact that you are very pessimistic regarding the capacity of the institutions to adapt, to continue being a leader in growth in the future. Why do you see that now? If you say, and it's true, that in the past, this was, institutions were very, very important as a kind of engine for the growth. Why do you think that they will not be able to adapt, even if there is not enough research? But why do you think so? Why are you so pessimistic? Shouldn't we be a bit more optimistic about this ongoing capacity or capacity of ongoing change of the institutions themselves? That's
Geoff, we have here with us an ex-minister for social affairs some times ago, and he has worked also in the European. He was European Parliament and worked also for the Social Committee in the European basis. Dr. Silva Pineda, do you want to make any question to Geoff? It's a pleasure to have you here with us. I don't know if you are listening.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, I think that when we speak about social innovation, I understand very well the realization of pessimism. Why? Because social innovation implies reform, implies changing of process, implying changing of ideas, and sometimes implies radical changes. This is quite different. This is why pessimism is more easy to accept that the other side has to fight against this situation. Eu acho que social innovation needs to be developed a kind of systematic approach. Why? because difficulty as our organizations are always based in vertical departments, and social innovation needs a very horizontal approach. And my idea is that the universities, centers of research, technology must be interrelated with people who are working in grant. For example, in Portugal, we have a lot of society in the colleges, institutions of social who develop a great role in social activities. The public power have a very important role to incentive this kind of innovation. For me, social innovation appears if you have a very good relation between the people who are thinking and the people who are working in grants. And the role of the public power is very important to create kind of incentives and also to evaluate the results of this kind of cooperation. Thank you.
Okay. And to finalize, we have also there's Luis Maia that is also wanting to make any question, and then I pass to you and we close, okay? On our topic. Luis.
Hello. Hello,
yes.
Jeff.
We are not seeing, we are only listening to you. Okay.
Okay. So, first thank you for this interesting lecture, let's say. And I agree with you. We read Aristotle's and we still have the same models of governance than 2000 years ago. While in technology, in energy, in food, and other realities of life, this is not the case. So, but also considering the social sciences, many times I think that we are trying to reinvent the wheel while some models have been tested. Just a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure to share with Jaime the floor in a presentation on cooperatives and mutualism solutions. Actually, in the 19th centuries, where there was also a strong wave of innovation and challenges, and the challenge that created a lot of problems for a large part of the population, both in terms of consumption with the rise of the prices, in terms of small farmers at the time with the machines that entered with the industrial revolution entered into the market, and also the fertilizings. And so there was solutions like the Rockdale solution, which was the first consumption cooperative. And the Raiffeisen, for instance, was the first bank that still today exists as a cooperative bank in order to face and to allow the small farmers to have the machines and the fertilizers that they needed to produce. Crédit Agricole, for instance, is still today in the same line. And nowadays we face more or less the same problem, which means a large wave of innovation and change. Lots of people in the organizations and small companies excluded from this process, large investments required. And while among the big corporations, what we've seen is mergers and acquisitions as a result of this, because they need large capacity for investments. At the smaller scale, we have been losing completely the sense that cooperativism and mutualism can be solutions to the same problems we have 200 years ago. And actually, by doing this, we are giving the floor to solutions that might look very simple, but have been also tested and failed, of course, 100 years ago or 120 years ago. That look like a solution in which exclusion. Okay. This is my question.
Sorry, because I think someone appeared here. Okay. Yes. Henrique, can you take the sound to Miguel?
Okay. So my question was, are we not forgetting that some solutions have been proved to be good solutions and might be, of course, with the natural restyling, let's say, and the rebranding, might be useful for the modern times? That was my question. Thank you.
Okay. I think we have no more question. I think anyone wants to make any topical question? Okay. So, Geoff, you can please say the all and then make a final statement. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. These are all great questions, and I love going back in history to find old ideas which were just too early or just need reviving or remaking, exactly as you just said. And this is why I think everyone should learn the history of social imagination, because I mean, there are so many actually 19th century ideas about money or land or mutuals, which probably are more 21st century than 20th century. So just two or three comments. I mean, the fantastic comments you've all made. So first of all, a lot of what I work on institutions is about new kinds of horizontal cross-cutting structures in cities, because most social issues don't fit neatly in the old silos. And maybe just to give one example, which perhaps might be relevant to your re-elected mayor of Lisbon, Mr. Moedas. So one of the models I've been trying to persuade other cities of is done by Amsterdam, called Open Research Amsterdam, where they, under the city has a chief scientist, and they create working groups of city officials, but also academics and civil society, to work on problem solving for the city. It's a very simple idea. They have 100, 200 groups at any one point, but it's trying to mobilize the brain power of the whole city around the city's social needs. It seems so obvious to me that any big city like Porto or Lisbon should have something like that, which is creating a horizontal, collaborative, intelligence, grounded social solution team. Secondly, one of our challenges always with social innovation and the politicians is they're not that interested in the general, they're interested in the specific. So often the best way of making an argument is through a problem they have, which they can't solve with current methods. And in many countries, as I said at the beginning, aging and demographic change is the obvious example where there has to be a remaking of care homes, care in the home, use of technologies. And most countries lack institutions well designed to do that. So we will be publishing quite a few things later this year of different options around that. I could talk for much more. But let me just finish with this, the question Luis raised. So I think the Acemoglu message was that actually in some points you do need to reinvent your institutions. That's what happened in Japan and South Korea and all over the world to generate the growth surges of the last 40 or 50 years. And my fear for Europe is that we won't do that enough, or we'll only do it if the crisis gets so severe, like a war, that we have no choice but to reinvent things. And I think the task of this kind of group is to help push the reinvention without needing to wait for a collapse or a war or a total, global depression. So we avoid the pain but get the benefits. And my fear is we won't change fast enough. We'll cling on to anachronistic structures. We'll hope they will reinvent themselves enough. And it may be just about okay, but it will be far from as optimal compared to what we need. And that's why I've become a bit obsessed with this issue of institutional innovation and institutional redesign. Because if you don't do that, all the wonderful innovations in business or in civil society, they are held back by the sluggishness of the core of the system, the central institutions, which just haven't adapted fast enough to the pressures, the challenges.
Geoff, thank you very much for your time. I think it was an incredible session. We hope that we can see very soon. We will work on you coming to Oporto, okay? Because it's incredible as you don't know Oporto, okay? We'll work on that. Thank you very much and have a nice week. And thank you for everybody, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good evening.
Good evening.